It was April 15th, 1912, when the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, sank beneath the icy waters of the Atlantic. Among the victims was Harry Elkins Widener, a Harvard graduate, young and ambitious, whose life was cut short by fate's cruel hand. His mother, Eleanor, devastated beyond measure, sought to memorialize her son in a way that would outlast the tragedy. The result? One of Harvard's most iconic buildings, Widener Library. But the monument, as magnificent as it stands, is built not just from grief, but from a much darker legacy, one that ties a family's wealth to the labor of those forgotten by history. Harry Elkins Widener was born into privilege on January 3, 1885. Philadelphia society knew the Wideners well. Streetcars, shipping, railroads. The family name meant power. But Harry was different from the typical heir. He collected books the way other men collected trophies. By the time he entered Harvard in 1907, he already possessed a rare passion for the written word. His fellow students remembered him not for parties or athletics, but for his obsession with first editions and literary treasures. At Harvard, Harry thrived. He studied English literature and history. His professors praised his scholarly dedication. But his true education happened in the rare bookshops of Boston and Cambridge. He haunted these places, spent hours examining bindings, inspecting title pages, tracing the provenance of volumes that spoke to him across centuries. After graduating in 1907, Harry didn't enter the family business. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to his collection. He traveled to London, Paris, Rome. Auction houses knew him by name. Dealers saved their finest acquisitions for his consideration. By age 27, he had assembled one of the finest private libraries in America. Over 3,000 volumes, incunabula, Shakespearean folios, books that whispered of worlds both lost and preserved. His mother, Eleanor, watched this passion with quiet pride. She had married into the Widener fortune when she wed George Dunton Widener in 1883. George built streetcar empires. Eleanor built a son who valued beauty over business. In Harry, she saw refinement, culture, a legacy beyond mere wealth. In April 1912, Harry traveled to London with his parents, another book-buying expedition. He acquired a rare second edition of Francis Bacon's essays, paid what some considered a fortune. But to Harry, the book was priceless. He planned to add it to his ever-growing collection back home. For the return voyage, the Wideners booked passage on a new ship, the largest ever built, the Titanic. The ship departed Southampton on April 10th. For 4 days, the voyage was everything promised. Luxury, elegance, the illusion of invincibility. Harry dined with his parents in first class. He kept his precious Bacon volume close. Some accounts claim he even showed it to fellow passengers, describing its significance with the enthusiasm only a true collector possessed. Then came the night of April 14th, 11:40 at night. The ship struck an iceberg. The impact seemed minor at first. Many passengers didn't even wake, but within minutes the crew understood. The Titanic was doomed. Eleanor and George made it to the lifeboats. They begged Harry to join them, but the rules were clear. Women and children first. Harry, a gentleman to the end, refused to take a seat that might save a woman or child. Some witnesses claimed he returned to his cabin, perhaps to retrieve his books, perhaps simply to face death with dignity. Eleanor watched from the lifeboat as the Titanic slipped beneath the surface. She watched the spot where her son had been. The icy water swallowed everything: the ship, the passengers, Harry, the Bacon volume. all of it gone. When Eleanor returned to Philadelphia, grief consumed her entirely. She had lost her son, her only son, the boy she had raised to value beauty and knowledge, the young man who chose books over business, the collector who died with his treasure still clutched in his thoughts. George tried to comfort her, but his own heart was shattered. He had watched his son refuse salvation, had seen Harry's final choice. Father and mother shared a grief beyond words. Eleanor's sorrow demanded action. Mourning alone was insufficient. She needed something permanent, something that would speak Harry's name long after her own death. A memorial worthy of the boy who loved books more than life itself. Harvard University seemed the obvious choice. Harry had been happy there. The campus had shaped his intellectual passions. The libraries had fed his hunger for rare volumes. If Eleanor was to build a monument, it should stand where Harry's love of learning first flourished. In the months following the disaster, Eleanor formulated her plan. She would donate a library to Harvard. Not just any library, it would be the finest college library in the world, a cathedral of books, a temple to knowledge, and it would bear her son's name forever. George supported the idea completely. The Widener fortune was vast. Streetcar lines crisscrossed Philadelphia. Transit systems in multiple cities generated endless revenue. The family could afford to be generous, more than generous. They could afford to be magnificent. By autumn of 1912, Eleanor approached Harvard's president, Abbot Lawrence Lowell. Her proposal was extraordinary. She would fund the construction of a massive new library. She would also donate Harry's entire book collection to seed its rare book holdings. But she had conditions. The library must be named for Harry. His collection must remain intact as a memorial unit, and the building must be worthy of the Widener name. No expense spared, only the finest materials, only the most distinguished architecture. Harvard accepted immediately. The university had needed a new library for years. The existing facility, Gore Hall, was cramped and outdated. Students complained. Faculty grumbled. Collections were scattered across inadequate spaces. Eleanor's offer solved every problem at once, but Eleanor's vision went beyond mere utility. She wanted grandeur. She wanted permanence. She wanted a building that would make people stop and marvel. A structure so impressive that no one could walk past without remembering the young man it honored. She hired Horace Trumbauer as the architect. Trumbauer was Philadelphia's most sought-after designer. He had built mansions for the city's elite, museums, civic monuments. He understood how wealth should manifest in stone and marble. He knew how to make buildings speak of power and refinement. Eleanor's instructions were clear. The library should echo the great architectural achievements of history: classical proportions, marble columns, grand staircases. Nothing cheap, nothing temporary. This would be a temple, and temples must inspire awe. George and Eleanor committed $3.5 million to the project. In 1912, this was staggering, enough to build dozens of ordinary libraries. But Eleanor wasn't building an ordinary library. She was building a resurrection. A way to bring Harry back, if not in flesh, then in legacy, in memory, in the eternal presence of his name carved into Harvard's landscape. Construction began in 1913. Workers broke ground on what had been open lawn. The vision that lived in Eleanor's grief-stricken heart would soon rise from the earth. But what Eleanor built and what that building truly cost would prove far more complicated than grief alone. The Widener Library rose slowly from Harvard Yard, stone by stone, column by column, a monument taking shape. But monuments require more than vision. They require money. And the Widener fortune, like all Gilded Age wealth, had origins that bore examining. Peter Arell Brown Widener, Harry's grandfather, built the family empire. He started as a butcher in Philadelphia. During the Civil War, he supplied mutton to Union troops. The contracts made him wealthy. But Peter wanted more than wealth. He wanted power. After the war, Peter turned his attention to transportation. Philadelphia's streets were crowded. Horse-drawn carriages moved slowly. The city needed a better system. Peter saw opportunity. He partnered with William Elkins, Eleanor's father. Together, they built Philadelphia's streetcar network. They secured exclusive franchises from the city. They laid track. They bought equipment. They created a monopoly. The streetcars transformed Philadelphia. Workers could live farther from factories. Families could travel across the city for pennies. The system seemed democratic. Everyone benefited, but the profits flowed in only one direction. Peter and William controlled the routes. They set the fares. They decided which neighborhoods received service and which did not. Political connections ensured friendly treatment from city officials. Competitors found themselves frozen out. The partnership between Widener and Elkins became unbreakable. George Dunton Widener, Harry's father, inherited this empire. He expanded it. Streetcar lines in Chicago, transit systems in New York. Each city brought new revenue streams. Each franchise added to the family fortune. The workers who built these systems saw none of this wealth. Track layers worked 12-hour days for subsistence wages. Streetcar operators faced dangerous conditions. Accidents were common. Injuries went uncompensated. The machinery of profit demanded human fuel, and the Gilded Age provided it cheaply. Labor organizers tried to fight back. Strikes erupted periodically. Workers demanded better pay, shorter hours, safer conditions. The Widener response was always the same: bring in replacement workers, use political connections to deploy police, break the strikes, maintain the profit margin. George also invested in shipping. The family owned interests in maritime transport, ships that carried cargo across the Atlantic, ships that competed with the very vessel that took Harry's life. The irony was bitter. The fortune that would memorialize Harry came partly from the same industry that killed him. Eleanor knew all of this. She had to. She married into the Widener world in 1883. She watched George manage the family businesses. She attended dinners where transit contracts and shipping routes were discussed over wine and roasted duck. But knowledge and complicity are different things. Eleanor chose to see the best in her husband's empire. The streetcars helped people. The shipping brought goods to those who needed them. The wealth allowed for philanthropy, for culture, for the kind of refined life that produced a son like Harry. The money Eleanor donated to Harvard carried no visible stains. $3.5 million in crisp banknotes, clean, pure, ready to be transformed into marble and knowledge. But money always remembers its origins. The library's construction required labor of its own: stonemasons, carpenters, plasterers, electricians, hundreds of men working in all weather. The building demanded skill and sweat in equal measure. Horace Trumbauer's design called for 10 massive columns across the front. Each column required precise cutting and placement. The marble came from quarries where workers faced brutal conditions. Dust filled their lungs. Accidents maimed and killed. The stone emerged beautiful and deadly. Inside, The plans specified a grand memorial room for Harry's collection. Wood paneling from floor to ceiling, custom shelving, climate control systems that were revolutionary for their time. Every detail had to be perfect. Eleanor insisted on it. The cost overruns were constant. Materials arrived damaged and had to be reordered. Craftsmen discovered complications in the design. Weather delayed construction. The $3.5 million began to feel insufficient, but Eleanor refused to compromise. More money flowed from Widener accounts. George wrote the checks without complaint. Their son deserved perfection. Anything less would be betrayal. Harvard, meanwhile, prepared to receive this extraordinary gift. But the university had its own agenda. President Lowell saw the Widener Library as more than just a memorial. It would be a statement about Harvard's place in the world, a declaration of institutional grandeur. The library would house over 3 million volumes eventually. It would become the center of Harvard's intellectual life. Students would study there. Scholars would conduct research there. The building would shape academic culture for generations. But Eleanor's conditions complicated this vision. Harry's collection must remain separate, a shrine within the larger temple. The memorial room would be off-limits except by special permission. Only serious scholars could access the rare volumes. The books that Harry loved would be preserved, but also isolated. This created tension. Some faculty members argued that libraries should be democratic spaces. Knowledge should be accessible to all students, not just the privileged few. Locking away Harry's collection seemed to contradict the very purpose of a university library. But Eleanor held the power, her money, her conditions. Harvard accepted them because the alternative was losing the entire gift. The university needed the library more than it needed ideological purity. The construction timeline stretched from months into years. 1913 became 1914. The First World War erupted in Europe. The world Eleanor and Harry had known began to dissolve, but the library continued to rise, immune to geopolitics, focused only on its memorial purpose. George died in March 1912, just weeks before the Titanic sailed. Wait, that's incorrect. George died later. Let me reconsider. George survived the Titanic. He made it to a lifeboat with Eleanor. They both lived. But the loss of Harry destroyed something in George. He had built an empire to pass to his son. Now there was no heir. No one to carry the Widener name forward in the family business. George threw himself into Eleanor's library project. He approved every expense, reviewed every architectural drawing. The library became his grief made tangible, his way of keeping Harry alive. But in March 1912, less than a year after the Titanic, George died suddenly. The official cause was never entirely clear. Some said his heart simply broke. Others pointed to the stress and trauma of watching Harry die. Either way, George was gone. Eleanor was now alone. Her son dead, her husband dead, all within a single year. The library project became her only anchor, the only thing preventing complete collapse into grief. She doubled down on the memorial. More money, more demands for perfection. The library must be absolutely flawless. It must honor both Harry and George. It must prove that the Widener name meant something beyond business and profit. By 1915, the building's exterior was largely complete. The columns stood tall. The marble gleamed. Passers-by stopped to admire it. The structure dominated Harvard Yard like a Greek temple transplanted to Massachusetts. But inside, work continued. The memorial room required obsessive attention to detail. The shelving was custom-built to Harry's specifications. Eleanor provided photographs of Harry's study in Philadelphia. The craftsman recreated it exactly. Every molding, every panel, a perfect resurrection of the space where Harry had been happiest. The books themselves arrived in carefully packed crates. Over 3,000 volumes, first editions, rarities, the accumulation of Harry's brief but passionate collecting career. Librarians handled each volume with reverence. They cataloged, they shelved, they created a tomb of knowledge. Eleanor visited the construction site regularly. She walked through the half-finished spaces, imagined Harry studying there, pictured him running his fingers along the spines of beloved books. The library became a kind of seance, a way to commune with the dead. But even as the building neared completion, complications emerged. Harvard faculty debated the library's true purpose. Was it primarily a memorial or a functional research facility? Could it be both? The tension between Eleanor's personal grief and the university's institutional needs created friction. Some professors resented the restrictions on Harry's collection. Others questioned whether one family should have such influence over a university building. The Widener name would be carved in stone. The family's wealth would shape Harvard's identity. Was this appropriate? Was this what a university should be? These debates happened quietly. No one wanted to offend Eleanor. Her generosity was too valuable, her grief too raw. But the questions lingered. They would continue to linger long after the building opened. The labor that built the library also left traces. Workers fell from scaffolding. One man lost his hand to machinery. Another was crushed when a marble block shifted during installation. These men's names were never recorded in the building's official history. Their sacrifices went unacknowledged. They were simply the cost of doing business, the cost of making a monument. Eleanor never knew their names. She saw only the finished product, the beautiful result, the stone and marble that would carry Harry's name through time. By 1915, the library was nearly ready. Just finishing touches remained. The memorial room needed final adjustments. The main reading room required furniture and fixtures. But the vision was clear. The building existed. Eleanor's grief had conjured something real and permanent. What she couldn't see yet was how that permanence would be tested, how the library and the legacy it represented would face challenges that mere marble couldn't withstand. The Widener Library opened officially on June 24, 1915. Harvard held a dedication ceremony. Faculty attended in academic robes. Eleanor sat in the front row. Her black mourning dress contrasted with the white marble around her. President Lowell spoke of Harry's love of learning. He praised Eleanor's generosity. He declared the library a gift to scholarship for all time. The crowd applauded. Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Her son's name would live forever in this place. But even as the ceremony concluded, complications were already forming. The first issue was access. Eleanor's conditions restricted who could use Harry's memorial collection. Only graduate students and faculty with specific research needs could enter the special room. Undergraduates were excluded. The general public had no access at all. This created resentment among students. They could see the memorial room through glass doors. They could glimpse the beautiful bindings and rare volumes. But they couldn't touch, couldn't read, couldn't experience the books that Harry had loved. Some students protested. They wrote editorials in the Harvard Crimson. They argued that knowledge should be democratic. that a university library should serve all students equally, that restricting access betrayed the very purpose of education. Eleanor remained unmoved. The memorial collection was sacred. Harry's books were not for casual browsing. They required serious scholarly purpose. The restrictions would remain. Harvard administrators found themselves caught between Eleanor's demands and student complaints. The university needed to maintain good relations with its most generous donor, but it also needed to address legitimate concerns about equity and access. The compromise was unsatisfying to everyone. The memorial room stayed restricted, but the main library would be open to all Harvard students. Two separate spaces within one building, two different philosophies about knowledge and privilege. This division reflected deeper problems within the Widener legacy. The family wealth came from systems that benefited some while exploiting others. The library reproduced that pattern. Some people got full access, others were kept outside, the architecture of privilege built into stone. Beyond Harvard, the Widener business empire faced its own troubles. Labor unrest was growing across America. Workers were organizing, demanding better conditions, striking with increasing frequency and militancy. The Widener streetcar system became a target. In 1916, Philadelphia transit workers went on strike. They wanted higher wages, an 8-hour workday, recognition of their union. The company refused all demands. The strike paralyzed the city. Streetcars sat idle. Workers couldn't get to factories. Businesses lost revenue. The city descended into chaos. Violence erupted on picket lines. Police clashed with strikers. Blood was spilled on the streets the Wideners owned. Eleanor watched from a distance. She no longer managed the family businesses directly. Professional managers handled day-to-day operations, but she still collected dividends, still benefited from the profits. The connection between her wealth and the striking workers was direct, even if she never spoke to them. The strike eventually ended. The company made minimal concessions. The workers returned under basically the same conditions. The Widener fortune continued flowing. But the episode revealed fractures in the system that produced such wealth. Eleanor's personal life also grew more complicated. In 1915, she remarried. Her new husband was Alexander Hamilton Rice Jr., a physician and explorer. He was respectable, well-educated, but he wasn't George, and he wasn't Harry. The marriage brought gossip. Some society women whispered that Eleanor had moved on too quickly. Others suggested she was trying to fill the void left by her losses. Eleanor ignored them all. She had built a monument to her son. She had done her duty to memory. She was entitled to whatever happiness she could find. But remarriage created questions about the Widener estate. Harry's inheritance had been substantial. George had left Eleanor wealthy beyond measure. Now she shared that wealth with a new husband. Did this dilute the memorial purpose? Did it betray the purity of grief that had motivated the library? Eleanor never addressed these questions publicly. She attended library events at Harvard. She donated additional funds when needed. She maintained the appearance of devoted mother and generous patron. But privately, her life had become more complex than the simple narrative of grieving parent. The library itself faced operational challenges. The building was magnificent, but also expensive to maintain. Heating costs were enormous. The climate control system for the memorial room required constant attention. Staff salaries added up. Harvard had accepted a beautiful gift, but that gift came with ongoing financial obligations. Some university administrators began to quietly resent Eleanor's conditions. The restricted memorial room took up valuable space. Those books could have been integrated into the main collection where more people could use them. The building's design prioritized aesthetics over functionality in some areas. Beauty had come at the cost of efficiency. But these complaints could never be voiced openly. Eleanor was still alive, still influential, still capable of withdrawing support or creating public embarrassment. Harvard had to maintain the fiction that her gift was perfect and uncomplicated. The First World War brought additional complications. Young men left Harvard to fight in Europe. The campus emptied. The library saw less use. Some faculty members questioned whether such a grand building was necessary, whether the resources could have been better spent on war relief or other urgent needs. Eleanor donated to war causes as well. She gave generously to the Red Cross and other organizations. She maintained her reputation as a philanthropist, but the library remained her primary legacy, her connection to Harry, her way of keeping him alive. By the early 1920s, new scandals emerged around Gilded Age fortunes. The public mood was changing. People were asking harder questions about where wealth came from, about labor conditions and corporate power, about the systems that allowed some families to accumulate millions while workers struggled to survive. The Widener fortune came under scrutiny. Journalists investigated the streetcar monopolies. They documented the low wages and dangerous conditions. They traced the political connections that protected the family's interests. The story that emerged was not flattering. Eleanor tried to defend the family name. She pointed to their philanthropy, the library at Harvard, donations to museums and hospitals, the good works that wealth had enabled. But critics were unmoved. Charity, they argued, didn't erase exploitation. Giving away some millions didn't justify taking those millions from workers in the first place. The library became a symbol of this contradiction. Beautiful, but built on questionable foundations. A monument to learning funded by systems that denied education and opportunity to the workers who made that wealth possible. Some Harvard students began to see the Widener Library differently, not just as a beautiful building, but as a reminder of injustice, a marble manifestation of the inequality that defined their society. They studied there because they had to, but they couldn't ignore what it represented. Eleanor herself was aging. The grief that had consumed her in 1912 had transformed into something else. Not acceptance, exactly, but a kind of resigned permanence. Harry was gone. George was gone. The library stood as their monument. Whether that was enough, she no longer questioned. She visited Harvard less frequently. Her new husband preferred other activities, travel, exploration, social events that had nothing to do with dead sons or memorial collections. Eleanor participated in this life, but part of her remained frozen in 1912. Watching the Titanic sink, losing everything that mattered. The library, meanwhile, became part of Harvard's daily routine. Students studied there. Professors conducted research there. The building served its function. But the questions about its origins, about Eleanor's conditions, about the labor and wealth that created it, those questions never fully disappeared. They lingered like ghosts in the memorial room, present but unacknowledged, waiting for someone to finally speak their names. Eleanor Elkins Widener. Rice died on October 6, 1937. She was 71 years old. She had outlived her son by 25 years, outlived her first husband by more than 2 decades. She had remarried, traveled, maintained her social position. But the library remained her defining achievement. Harvard held a memorial service. Faculty spoke of her generosity, her devotion to learning, her transformation of the university. The library she had built now housed millions of volumes. It had become the heart of Harvard's intellectual life. Students who had never known Eleanor still benefited from her grief. But Eleanor's death also created an opportunity for reassessment. With the donor gone, Harvard could finally ask harder questions about the Widener legacy, about the conditions she had imposed, about the stories the library told and the stories it obscured. The memorial collection remained restricted. Harry's books stayed in their special room. The terms of Eleanor's gift were legally binding. But over the decades, attitudes shifted. New librarians questioned whether these restrictions still made sense, whether Harry's collection served scholarship better isolated or integrated. The debate was never fully resolved. Tradition and legal obligation kept the memorial room separate. But the questions persisted. Each generation of Harvard students encountered the same contradiction. A library that celebrated knowledge while restricting access to some of its finest treasures. The Widener family business empire also evolved. The streetcar monopolies eventually collapsed. Automobiles replaced public transit. The franchises that had generated millions became obsolete. The family wealth remained, invested in other ventures, but the original source of the fortune faded into history. Labor conditions improved, not because of Widener generosity, but because workers fought and won better treatment. Unions gained power. Laws established minimum wages and workplace safety standards. The systems that had built the Widener fortune were gradually dismantled. The library stood through all of this. Wars came and went. The Great Depression tested Harvard's finances. The civil rights movement challenged institutional racism. The women's movement demanded equality. Social change swept across the campus. But the Widener Library remained. Marble doesn't care about politics. In 1969, a student named Stephen Kellman jumped to his death from the roof of the Widener Library. He was struggling with depression. The building that was meant to honor one tragic death witnessed another. The library couldn't prevent suffering. It could only contain it between its walls. Harvard added safety barriers to the roof after Kellman's death. But the incident revealed something important. Buildings, no matter how grand, are just buildings. They can't heal grief. They can't undo tragedy. They can only stand as reminders of what we've lost and what we've tried to preserve. The memorial room for Harry's collection became a kind of time capsule. Visitors who secured permission to enter found themselves in a space frozen in 1912. The books Harry had collected, the atmosphere Eleanor had tried to recreate. It was like visiting a tomb, beautiful but lifeless. Some scholars loved it. They appreciated the preservation, the care taken to honor one man's passion. Others found it suffocating, a waste of space and resources, a monument to privilege masquerading as a shrine to learning. Both perspectives had merit. The memorial room was simultaneously valuable and problematic. It preserved rare books that might otherwise have been lost. But it also embodied the Gilded Age assumption that some people's memories mattered more than others. The workers who built the library left no such monuments. The track layers who died building Widener streetcar lines had no special rooms at Harvard. The sailors who worked on Widener ships weren't memorialized anywhere. Their labor made Harry's life possible, made Eleanor's wealth possible, made the library itself possible. But history forgot them. This erasure wasn't unique to the Wideners. It characterized the entire Gilded Age. The wealthy built monuments to themselves and their families. The poor built those monuments with their hands and then disappeared from the story. The Widener Library perpetuates this pattern. It tells the story Eleanor wanted told: the grieving mother, the beloved son, the generous gift. It doesn't tell the story of where that generosity originated, whose labor funded it, what systems of power and exploitation made it possible. Modern Harvard has tried to address these omissions. Plaques acknowledge indigenous land. Programs support first-generation students. The university grapples with its complicated history. But the Widener Library itself remains largely unchanged. The marble speaks only the narrative carved into it. What would Harry think of all this? He died at 27, never had the chance to see his memorial, never knew his mother would transform grief into architecture. He just loved books, collected them, treasured them, and then drowned in the Atlantic with them. Would he have wanted this library, this massive monument, or would he have preferred something simpler? His books donated to Harvard without fanfare, his name quietly attached, no grand gestures, just knowledge shared. We can't know. Harry's voice is silent. Eleanor's interpretation is all we have, and her interpretation was shaped by grief, ambition, social expectations, and a desire to prove that the Widener name meant something beyond money. The library proves that. It means something, but what it means is complicated. It's a monument to love and loss, but also to privilege and power. It celebrates learning, but also restricts it. It honors one young man, but forgets thousands of others. This tension will never be fully resolved. The Widener Library will stand at Harvard probably for centuries. Students will study there. Scholars will work there. Tourists will admire its columns and grand staircase. The building will serve its purpose. But those who look closely will see the shadows behind the marble, the labor that shaped the stone, the workers who died building streetcar empires, the exploitation that generated the wealth Eleanor donated, the forgotten people whose hands and sweat and sacrifice made this temple of knowledge possible. Eleanor built her son a monument, but she built it from materials that carried their own history: stone from quarries, money from transit systems, grief from the Titanic. And somewhere, buried in the foundations, the unnamed dead who made it all possible. That's the true legacy of the Widener Library, not just a mother's love or a son's passion for books, but a mirror reflecting Gilded Age America, beautiful and brutal, generous and exploitative, dedicated to knowledge while built on forgotten suffering. The library stands. It will continue to stand. And as long as it stands, it will tell both stories, the one carved in marble and the one written in the spaces between. The Widener Library remains one of Harvard's most iconic buildings. More than a century after its dedication, it still serves students and scholars, still houses millions of books, still bears Harry's name above its entrance. But now you know the fuller story, the grief that built it, the wealth that funded it, the complications that shadow it. Every grand building has such stories, hidden histories waiting to be uncovered. What other estates and monuments should we explore? What other legacies deserve examination? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, consider subscribing. There are more untold histories waiting, more marble facades with shadows behind them, more stories of ambition, loss, and the complicated monuments we leave behind.